So we are looking at conflict in To Be or Not to Be by Kurt Vonnegut. Now, obviously we would have our character versus self. In every story you ever read, there really is a character versus self conflict. And it could be as simple as like a character just didn't want to get out of bed that morning. Maybe they were really tired. You could say the character versus themselves because they are extremely tired and it is difficult for them to even want to leave their house and get ready to go to work. Character versus self. Not a big conflict, but it is. So for this, I had said Edward faces an internal conflict because his wife has just given birth to triplets, but he lives in a society where the birth of one family member means someone must volunteer to die in order for a new life to take their place on Earth. This causes an internal conflict for Edward because he has to make the decision to kill Dr. Hitz and Leonora in order and him Dr. Hitz, well, he actually committed suicide. That was how he solved his conflict, which is dystopian in and of itself. Dr. Hitz, Lenora, and himself in order to avoid infanticide for his children, in order to avoid infanticide, and that just means the killing of an infant. So that would be the vocabulary word there. So that's how he solved his conflict. We can also say the painter had a character versus self conflict. Actually, the painter has an internal conflict because he is tired of living in a society that is unfair to those who cannot find someone to volunteer death in order to have a family. Like, we could sort of maybe assume that in this story, everyone thinks things are perfect, but the painter doesn't. The painter is like, this world is not perfect. This world is sick and twisted. And then we could also, so when we get to the character versus character conflicts, we have the painter versus the orderly, right? So this is our painter, and he's painting his mural here. So when the orderly comes over and starts kind of instigating him, the orderly is going to say, lots of faces to fill in. Must be nice to be able to make pictures that look like something. That's the orderly, like, complimenting him, right? So then the painter, you think I'm proud of this daub. You think this is what life really looks like. They kind of get an argument here. And then basically the painter says, if you don't like it here, Grandpa, call these numbers and kill yourself, which is obviously not nice. Now, remember the painter too. He is old enough that people can tell that he already aged a little bit. He said he was 200. So when he started to about 200 years old, back in the days when people aged visibly, his age was going to be guessed. So he's 35. So that means people look younger than 35. So everyone in this world would just be stop aging in their 20s. So I wrote here, the painter has a conflict with the orderly because they are arguing about the best way to conclude one's life. So when they're talking here, and he says he was going to leave a mess for everyone, right? These are all the numbers that are the government assisted lines so that a person who's lived a very long life is able to volunteer to die so a baby can be born, probably a family member. And that's what they were having an argument about. We can say Edward has this conflict with Dr. Hitz because he kills him. We could say this conflict is resolved when Edward kills Dr. Hitz and himself. And then we would obviously have character versus society, right? Because Edward lives in this society where there are restrictions in place that state in order to have a child, parents must first find someone to volunteer to die. That is an incredibly difficult decision to make, obviously. And then we can start to assume here that those in purple, it's probably a lot easier for them to have kids if they wanted to. They could easily find someone to volunteer. They might even be able to take already existing volunteers and use them as their own for these receipts that people need. And the painter is the one that's giving this insight. If everything was so perfect, then the painter wouldn't be so miserable. I mean, he could be. Obviously, there's always people that are miserable. But for the purpose of the story, Kurt Vonnegut's using the painter to show the reader that things aren't what they seem in our society here. Character versus nature. If Edward's wife didn't have triplets, he wouldn't have even had this problem. So you could say that nature caused Edward and his wife's conflict. It's totally a natural occurrence if a woman is pregnant with one child, two, three, four. So we could say that was an issue, a conflict with nature. This one. Character versus technology. So you had Dr. Hitz. He saw the world was so overpopulated and things were so problematic. So what did Dr. Hitz do? He invented a gas chamber. This was supposed to be super shocking to readers because remember, we're in like the 60s. So World War II was 20 years away. People would have remembered all of this stuff. It was a horrible, horrible thing to this day. So these technological advancements in population control are not seen as a good thing by Edward, resulting in a conflict for Dr. Hitz. So Dr. Hitz's conflict with Edward kind of stems from the fact that he's the one that built the gas chambers. But you could also word it like this. Dr. Hitz saw that the world was extremely overpopulated. So he invented gas chambers in order to help those that wanted to die be able to do so. So his conflict technically was the overpopulation. And so that's what he did to fix it. He used technology, except the technology is now Edward's problem. So you could also say, wait a minute. I want to add here. Dr. Hitz saw that the world was extremely overpopulated after the cure for aging was released. That's what the conflict was. They cured aging and it created this overpopulation because obviously if people can live forever, I don't know. Do we think people will want to die still? It's hard to say. I mean, nobody wants to die. All right. And then you obviously have a character versus fate or destiny. Edward's triplets are unknowingly involved with a conflict of fate because their father makes the choice to kill himself and two other hospital staff members so that they may live. Edward faces a conflict with fate because he must decide whether or not to sacrifice his own life for his children. That is definitely character versus destiny. What is Edward's destiny going to be? Is he going to decide to kill these people and himself so he can make room for his children? Or is he going to just say, I can only find one and the other two aren't coming home with us? Well, Edward decided and he resolved his conflict. Well, his children, their conflict that they were not going to be killed, they would get to live. Actually, I was going to say twins here. The reason I say twins was because remember that Edward had one person. He had his maternal maternal grandpa. So technically it was the twins that weren't going to make it, but we'll just say triplets because in the end he still didn't care because he did have his grandpa. He didn't use him. He decided to take matters into his own hands. I guess for character versus supernatural, this whole situation doesn't exist, right? Like, but technically it could. Like, so I don't think you could leave this one. It would, if you were able to write about a character for Supernatural, I would love to read it.